I didn't think much of it at first, just a couple of wooden posts sticking out of the ground near the back edge of my property, right up against the old fence line that runs parallel to the airstrip. I remember standing there with my truck door still open, keys in my hand, just squinting at it like, huh, that's new. Maybe maintenance guys from the strip were marking something. Wouldn't be the first time. But then again, they usually leave flags, not treated lumber sunk 2 feet deep into the soil like they're planning a backyard wedding. Now, you gotta understand the layout here. This isn't some suburban HOA neighborhood with perfectly trimmed hedges and passive-aggressive emails about trash cans. This is rural land. Wide open, quiet except for the occasional low hum of a propeller plane lining up for landing. The airstrip's been here longer than most of the houses, including mine, and when I bought this place, I knew exactly what I was getting into. There's a clearly documented approach path that cuts across the back corner of my land. Not huge, just a narrow slice. But it matters. No tall structures, no overgrown trees, nothing that could interfere with a descending aircraft, basic safety stuff. Most folks around here respect that, not because they love rules, but because they understand gravity and physics don't really negotiate. But then the new neighbors moved in. Their names were Darren and Lila, mid-30s, city transplants, the kind of couple who says things like, "We just wanted something more authentic," while installing string lights and talking about maximizing the aesthetic potential of the land. At first, they seemed all right, friendly enough, always waving, always chatting about how beautiful the open field behind our properties looked. And yeah, it is beautiful, especially at sunset when the sky goes orange and you can see planes gliding in low, like something out of a movie. But here's the thing. They didn't see that field the way I did. To them, it wasn't regulated airspace. It wasn't part of a federally documented approach corridor. It was just unused space, empty, wasted, even. And that mindset, that's where this whole thing started to go sideways. Because 2 days after I saw those first posts, there were more. Not just a couple now, but a full grid pattern forming, beams stacked nearby, tools scattered around, and no, this wasn't the airstrip crew. This was clearly a DIY project, the kind that starts with Pinterest boards and ends with someone ignoring property lines. By the end of the week, it was done. A full-sized wooden gazebo, raised platform, railings, peaked roof that stood way higher than anything else in that field. I'm talking visible from the road kind of structure, the kind of thing that says, we're gonna sit here with wine glasses and watch the sunset. Except they built it on my land. Not like, oh, it's close to the boundary, kind of situation. No, this thing was several feet inside my surveyed line, sitting squarely in the section that's supposed to stay clear for incoming aircraft. I actually laughed when I realized it, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd, like, you don't accidentally build a whole gazebo in the wrong place. That takes commitment. So that evening, I walked over, calm, polite, just figuring maybe it was a misunderstanding. Darren was out there, already sitting in it like he'd just claimed a new kingdom. I said, hey man, I think there's been a mix-up. This structure's actually on my property. He didn't even stand up, just leaned back, one arm over the railing, real casual, and goes, yeah, we figured it was close, but it's just a few feet, right? The land's not being used anyway. That right there, that sentence. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be simple. I tried explaining, kept my voice steady, pointed out the survey markers, the boundary line, even mentioned the approach path regulations, you know, the part where planes come in low enough that you can literally see the pilot's face if the light hits right. And he just shrugged, actually shrugged, said, it's not like a plane's gonna hit it, it's small. Small. I remember just staring at the roof of that gazebo, the peak of it cutting into the sky right where those planes usually line up, and thinking, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Or worse, he just doesn't care. And then Lila chimed in from the house, yelling something about how it improves the view and how they'd already invested a lot into it. Ah, there it is. Not a misunderstanding, not confusion, just entitlement wrapped in a nice rustic aesthetic. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, because at that point, it wasn't about convincing them. It was about reality catching up. So I just nodded, said, all right, I hear you, turned around, and walked back across my field. And the whole time, I could feel it. That shift, that quiet moment where a situation stops being a neighborly disagreement and turns into something else, something official. Because here's what they didn't realize. This wasn't just about my land. This was about airspace, federal airspace. And unlike Darren, the people who regulate that don't shrug things off. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people get tripped up, and honestly, it's not even about bad intentions most of the time. It's about not understanding how property law and airspace regulations actually work together. According to standard procedure, when you own land near any kind of registered runway, even a small rural strip, you're not just dealing with dirt and fences, you're dealing with something called an approach protection zone. And that's not optional. That's federally documented, mapped out, and enforced whether you pay attention to it or not. From a legal perspective, ownership of land does not give you unlimited vertical freedom. People love to think, my land, my rules. But that stops real quick when safety is involved, especially aviation safety. There are strict height limitations, and anything that penetrates that invisible corridor, even a structure as innocent-looking as a gazebo, can legally be classified as an obstruction. And once it hits that category, it's not a neighbor dispute anymore. It becomes a compliance issue. And here's the part most people don't expect. Enforcement doesn't require a lawsuit. It doesn't require me to drag them to court. One report to the right aviation authority triggers an inspection, and if the structure violates clearance standards, removal isn't a suggestion. It's an order. Now, psychologically, this is where it gets interesting. This is a psychological trap a lot of homeowners fall into, especially folks who move from urban areas into rural space. They see openness and assume flexibility. They assume rules are looser out here, more negotiable. But what's actually happening is something called perceived and used space bias. Basically, if land looks empty, people subconsciously downgrade its importance. They start believing that occupying it, even partially, is harmless, justified, even. And when you combine that with sunk cost, time, money, effort already invested into building something, you get a mindset that resists correction, not because they're right, but because admitting they're wrong suddenly becomes expensive. So when Darren shrugged and said, "It's just a few feet," that wasn't ignorance anymore. That was commitment to a bad decision. And once someone locks into that mindset, well, that's when reality usually steps in to finish the conversation. So the next morning, I made the call. Nothing dramatic, no long speech, just a quiet report to the regional aviation office. Told them there was a structure sitting inside a documented approach path. Gave them the airstrip ID, my parcel info, and that was it. No yelling, no threats, just facts. And then I went on with my day like nothing happened. Because here's the thing. When you hand a situation over to a system that actually has authority, you don't need to push anymore. You just wait. About a week later, I saw a white SUV roll down the dirt access road near the strip. Not flashy, just clean, official-looking, the kind of vehicle that doesn't belong unless there's a reason. A guy stepped out, mid-50s, calm, clipboard in one hand, rangefinder in the other. Not in a rush, not trying to impress anyone, just there to measure reality. He didn't come to my house first, didn't knock, didn't ask questions. He walked straight out into the field like he already knew where the problem was, which, I guess, he did. I followed at a distance, leaning on the fence, watching him work, and man, it was almost surgical. He lined himself up with the runway, checked headings, looked down at his notes, then up at the gazebo, then back through the rangefinder, small adjustments, tiny movements, like he was syncing the physical world with something already mapped out on paper. Darren came out about halfway through. You could tell he wasn't expecting this, had that half-confused, half-annoyed look people get when reality shows up uninvited. He walks up, arms crossed, already defensive. "Can I help you?" The inspector didn't even flinch, just said, "Routine evaluation of a reported obstruction within the approach corridor." Calm, neutral, no attitude, no emotion, just procedure. And that right there, that tone, that's when you could feel the shift. Because Darren tried to keep it casual at first. "It's just a gazebo, it's not that big." But the inspector didn't debate, didn't engage. He just kept measuring, wrote something down, adjusted position again. Then finally, he looked up and said, "Do you have a permit for this structure?" And you could almost hear the air go out of the conversation. Because permits, zoning, airspace clearance, those aren't things you can improvise your way through. Darren hesitated, then gave the only answer he had. No, but it's on our side. And that's when the inspector turned slightly, glanced toward the survey markers, then back at the structure. According to county records, he said, this is not on your parcel. Short sentence, quiet delivery, but it landed heavy. Now Lila came out too, clearly more emotional, already halfway into defense mode, talking about how they'd spent money, how no one told them, how it was just a sitting area. And again, no reaction from the inspector. He just finished his measurements, flipped a page on the clipboard, and said, this structure exceeds allowable height limits within the approach path and is located within a protected zone. It is classified as an obstruction. No drama, no raised voice, just a conclusion. And honestly, that's what made it hit harder. Because at that point, it wasn't my opinion anymore. It was documentation. Within a few days, the notice showed up, official letter, stamped, direct, no fluff. It listed everything. Encroachment across property boundary, violation of airspace clearance regulations, failure to obtain proper permits, and then the part that really mattered. Immediate removal required. Not recommended, not please consider. Required. Or the county could step in and remove it themselves. And trust me, that version is a lot more expensive. I didn't go over there after that, didn't check in, didn't say, I told you so. I just let it play out. But you could feel the tension shift in the air. No more waving. No more casual conversations over the fence. Just silence. 2 days later, early morning, I heard the sound of a truck pulling up. Not a pickup this time, a flatbed, followed by another vehicle with tools. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and just watched from a distance. Not hiding, not involved, just present. They started with the roof. Took it down piece by piece, methodical, efficient, no hesitation. Then the railings, the supports, the floorboards. Everything that had gone up over the course of a week came down in a matter of hours. And Darren, he wasn't sitting in it anymore. He stood off to the side, arms crossed again, but this time, not relaxed, not confident, just still. Lila stayed inside, didn't come out. By late afternoon, it was gone. Completely gone. No structure, no shadow, nothing but flattened grass where it used to stand. And that was it. No big confrontation, no shouting match, no dramatic ending. Just absence. The kind of silence that only shows up after something unnecessary has been corrected. That evening, right around sunset, I saw a small training plane coming in low over the field, same as always, lining up perfectly with the runway. And for the first time since that gazebo went up, there was nothing in its way. No roof cutting into the glide path. No structure pretending rules didn't apply. Just open space, exactly the way it was supposed to be. And standing there, watching that plane pass overhead, I remember thinking, this was never going to end any other way. So here's the part nobody really talks about. The part after everything's been taken down, after the trucks leave, after the dust settles, and the field looks like nothing ever happened. Because on the surface, yeah, it's over. The gazebo's gone. The airspace is clear. The property line is respected again. Case closed, right? Not exactly. Because situations like this, they don't just disappear, they leave a kind of residue. Not physical, but social, psychological. Now Darren and Lila still live next door. We still share that same stretch of land, that same view, that same quiet rhythm of planes passing overhead every now and then. But the dynamic? Completely different. No more small talk. No more, hey, beautiful evening, conversations, just that polite distance people keep when something's been settled, but not forgiven. And honestly, I don't blame them for being uncomfortable. But I also don't regret a single step I took. Because here's the reality most people don't want to say out loud. The lesson here is boundaries only work when they're enforced. Not explained, not suggested, enforced. You can be as polite as you want. You can explain things calmly. You can even give people the benefit of the doubt. But the moment someone decides that your space, your property, your rights, your safety margins are negotiable, you're no longer having a conversation. You're being tested, and that test usually sounds harmless. It's just a few feet. It's not hurting anyone. It's basically used anyway. Those phrases, they're designed to soften the situation, to make you question whether standing your ground is worth the friction. But what they're really doing is reframing the boundary as optional. And once that happens, it doesn't stop at a gazebo. It becomes a pattern. Now let's zoom out for a second. From a legal perspective, this whole thing was actually pretty straightforward. Property lines are documented, approach paths are regulated, and aviation safety isn't something you get to reinterpret because you like the view. But what made this situation complicated wasn't the law. It was the mindset. Because Darren and Lila didn't wake up one morning thinking, let's violate federal airspace regulations today. No, they saw an opportunity, an open space, a chance to create something they liked. And instead of asking, verifying, or even double-checking, they assumed. They assumed the land didn't matter. They assumed the rules were flexible. They assumed no one would push back. And that assumption, that's where everything went wrong. This is a psychological trap a lot of people fall into, especially when they transition into environments that feel less controlled, less structured, rural spaces, shared land edges, anything that isn't clearly fenced and labeled. They confuse lack of visibility with lack of ownership. They think, if I don't see someone using it, maybe it's fair game. But ownership doesn't disappear just because it's quiet. And safety regulations don't stop applying just because they're invisible. And here's another layer to it. Pride. Because once that structure went up, once time, money, and effort were invested, the situation changed. It wasn't just about a gazebo anymore. It was about being right. About not backing down. About justifying a decision that probably should have been questioned earlier. And that's a tough spot for anyone to be in. Because admitting a mistake early is cheap. But admitting it late? That can cost you everything you've already built. Literally. Now, could this have ended differently? Yeah, absolutely. One simple conversation before building. One survey check. One permit inquiry. That's all it would have taken. But instead, they skipped all that. And in doing so, they turned a peaceful piece of land into a problem that had only one possible outcome: removal. And if there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's this. You don't need to be aggressive to protect what's yours. But you do need to be firm. You don't need to escalate emotionally. But you do need to understand the systems that exist to back you up. Because when you rely on structure, legal structure, regulatory structure, you remove the argument from the equation. It's no longer about who feels right. It's about what is right. And that's a much harder thing to argue against. So if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, whether it's a fence, a driveway, a tree line, or yeah, even a gazebo, pause, check the facts, understand the rules, and don't let "it's just a small thing" convince you to ignore something that actually matters. Because small things have a way of becoming big problems. And sometimes, the difference between peace and conflict is just a few feet of land. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in my position? Would you have handled it the same way, or tried something different?